Definitely, I completely agree with you. Yeah, it's certainly, to address the question again, it would the bill, House Bill 6070, prevents the teaching of divisive topics in history. So that would equate to, teaching about the Trail of Tears without ever addressing the atrocities committed on the Trail of Tears. That would equate to teaching about slavery, but not from the other people's perspectives, to quell it and nullify it, and boil it down to just these were people being taken to another part of the continent, rather than sharing the important parts, the pain, the suffering, the fact that it was not willingly, slavery was not willingly done. It was forced upon people. House Bill 6070 would prevent these divisive, quote, divisive teachings. But and chime in if you'd like to, but at least for me, I feel as though it is the most divisive things about history that need to be taught. It is the uncomfortable conversations that need to be had, because that's how we learn from history. Has anyone, had an experience where maybe they felt like in their classroom, Ita, Debbie, or Brandon, where you felt like, maybe you felt like history, you're kind of being disenfranchised as a student because what you were learning was not exactly what you felt like, it wasn't being given the same respect as it should be?
I can speak on my experience. I think, like what Brandon said, this bill doesn't just it isn't made for Black and Brown students, but it actually goes against us in a way, because I feel like we're not being represented, and our perspectives aren't being told. And then on top of that, these conversations need to be have, I can't speak. These conversations need to happen in classrooms where both Black and Brown and every other student is inside of that class, and we get to talk about it and speak to one another and learn from one another. Because if we don't, we're gonna grow up and not understand each other, respect each other. So I think it's not just it doesn't work for us, but it can be harmful.
And I also think it's quite disrespectful that it's during this time that whoever wrote this bill found it most appropriate to bring out such a atrocious bill. We're in the middle of a pandemic where students are really suffering because of the system that they have already made, the bad system that's been in place for a long time now. And I think that this should be the time that our representative, our government should come together and make the changes that needs to be made, but not make up a bill that would just make more problems. It's just so disrespectful to students. We don't have counselors in our school that will help us during the pandemic. Where our schools, our roofs are literally falling down because of the no funding. Our schools, our teachers are suffering because of all the work they have to put in the pandemic, and nobody's making changes to that to make our lives better. But they're bringing out a bill that will literally silence our history. So I just thought it was really disrespectful.
Thank you very much for that, Debbie. And in fact, so first, I would like to go back to your point about mental health, especially. Tiara, how do you feel about House Bill 6070? And what do you think about it? How do you, what is your perspective seeing students so passionate about the bill itself?
Yeah, I think this is, luckily I've also seen students really active around bills to teach civics education and to have comprehensive, queer, inclusive sex ed at their schools. And so it's unfortunate that they had to work in opposition to a bill that didn't highlight things that they want. But during the summer of 2020, I also worked and saw so many young people mobilizing for Counselors Not Cops and for other issues that will directly impact our young people. So even when there are bills that do not reflect the values that students want to see, it's another way that they can get civically engaged and see how they can be a part of the system to make sure that the world that they are a part of and the world that they will soon be able to vote in is an important thing to be active in. Even if they don't yet have the right to vote, it's really important to have those voices heard. And that's why for many of the bills that I've also introduced, I've been able to recruit 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds who are testifying on bills that directly impact their school environments, their home environments, and their future, because it's super important that everyone's voice, especially those directly impacted, have their voices heard, whether or not they can vote right now or not. But this is the world that y'all are inheriting. So it is important that you have a voice and start flexing that muscle of activism now for causes that are immediately happening in your communities.
Thank you very much. I completely agree with you on that. And actually that leads me to another point, is back to bringing it back to schooling, bringing activism and schooling together. I'm not sure about Debbie, Ita, or Brandon, but I don't know many of my peers who know about this bill. I feel like, you know, I feel like schooling itself, there needs to be more of an element of current events, and there needs to be more emphasis in history on current civic activism overall, because I don't know a lot of people who know about this bill. Brandon, Debbie, Ita, do you know any of your peers who have heard about it? Do you know anyone else, or if it's even brought up in your schools? Is there any conversation around the bill?
I actually learned about this bill from students like me, youth activists like me, and I think that's like the power in bringing youth together, that when we're together, we're more powerful, we combat stuff more. But I would agree with you. The only reason why the person that told me about the bill knew about the bill was because she works with Arise, and Arise works with legislations in the House. So if she wasn't working with a youth organization that empowered her, she would not know about the bill. And I agree with you. Having this kind of connection between our school and what's happening outside in our community presently, that gives us a sense of knowing power, that knowing what's happening in our community and being able to be in our community and work with our community. I think that should be a big aspect in our schools.
For me, I also am hitting on the same note Debbie is, where, you know, my circles are very involved in this work. And so it was a conversation I was having quite often with people I talk to. But if I'm talking about my advisory, like, I'm the one who's usually like presenting this to folks, which isn't a problem. I think it's actually really, it's an honor to be able to like bring those ideas and those topics to folks. And I think I find this conversation, I mean, this question super interesting, because like, what if school taught youth how to have these conversations, right? Like, in trying to figure out how to testify for this bill, I learned a lot more about bill structures. I learned about, you know, how bills get pushed into either Senate or representative houses. So like, these processes I'm learning as I go along, but I think schools should teach folks how to be civically engaged. I feel like that's a skill that you can teach, and you can facilitate the growth of, whether it be through student government or directly with like staff taking the initiative, being like, hey, this bill, I don't think y'all would really like it. Let's have conversations about it. Let's organize, let's move. So for me, you know, this learning how to testify, learning how to do all of this is like a learning process. But I think that's, again, education being power. That power should be given to you. And it should be given in a way that they can understand, and they could see the fact that, no, when you're testifying, you don't have to use big words, or no, every single point of the bill specifically, like, it's about you speaking. And these ideas aren't really taught to students in even untraditional schools like the Met. These are things you have to sort of learn with practice, and I think school is the perfect place to do it.
I completely agree with you. Yeah, you know, schooling, especially, you know, since we're still in school, it's like the hub of our lives for a very long time. And so I feel like there should definitely be more emphasis on, rather than just looking to the past and learning, how can we take lessons from the past and apply them to today? And actually learn from history and apply the learning from history. So I would like to talk about oh yeah, sorry, hold on one second. Yeah, a question in the Q&A. So actually, let's address this question. Mr. Sundaresh said, have any panelists experienced a class or curriculum that has felt inclusive? What did that look like or feel like?
Oh,
Oh,
you
you
can
go ahead.
Okay, I'll just say quickly. At the Met, we have advisors instead of like different classes. And my advisor wasn't required like legally to teach us about this, but she really took the time to teach us about like history and civics education, and to read us books with authors that looked like us and had backgrounds like us. So that was very empowering and like eye-opening, and I really appreciate her for doing that.
Yes, and similarly, the first ever history course that I had in high school, I was a junior in high school, when we were learning about the Cold War. And instead of learning about the Cold War in the US, we learned about the Cold War in the Caribbean. And it featured first primary resources from Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And that was the first time outside of natural disasters that I had heard about history and global events impacting the global Caribbean. And from people who experienced that history right there, a really great book called Red Heat by Alex von Tunzelman, I believe. But it was the first time I had ever read history about folks who looked like me and from a place in the world that I had heard about, but had never experienced, and did not know how it became the quote unquote third world country that it was today. And it was once a very important part of the trades, the global trade system. And so that was a really important thing for me to see and learn about.
I don't know if this properly answers the question, but at classical, we have this, in junior year, we have a semester for junior research. It's called junior research. And I think it's really inclusive because we just research about whatever topic we want to learn about during that semester and write a paper about it and might make a presentation about it. And during my like entire career at classical for different topics that never even thought was possible to learn about, or I've never heard of, from different perspectives, from different people. So yeah, I think that's like a really inclusive of my journey at classical.
To answer the question for myself, and I want to hit on a few notes that others have said, I think the most inclusive history course I had was in 7th grade. It was, so my middle school segue, for 7th grade, we actually took, we looked at the westward expansion, starting from, the colonization of like Massachusetts, all the way down to about like the 1900s. So that was the first time like I had heard the perspective of Native American people, and like, which sounds crazy because we'd always have like Thanksgiving conversations and we talk about like first Thanksgiving and things like that. But it was the first time that I had honestly had seen Native American people as people instead of like a group, right? Like as one unanimous force. And that really, one, like changed my perspective on how, I saw Native American people, which I think speaks to the importance of teaching other people's histories. But also it really challenged the idea of like looking at diasporas as like one group. And the other, and I feel like for me personally, the one that hit me the most was hearing my rights listed out to me, like acknowledging the fact that, we were in a room where it was mostly Black and brown students, and hearing about like how to address a police officer and how to have those conversations. I didn't really grow up in a home where like I had other Black folk. So like that was the first time that conversation had been brought to me. And it shifted my perspective on what government really looks like, because I think that was the first time that I ever really felt that these systems were run by people, and that because they're run by people, they can change. And so for me, that class was really formative, and it planted a lot of seeds that I didn't see grow until 10th, 11th grade. But I think it really formed a lot of my perspective on engagement and being a part of a society. And I also found Tiara's point super powerful about like seeing DR and Haiti as like not just like places where bad things happen, but like places where people live and experience and are just like are systemically broken down. Because like in education, I never experienced something like that, and I am Dominican, so like I've never been able to go home. So those perspectives, besides the ones given by my family, were the only ones I ever had. So I think that also is why it's so important that we have these conversations. Less so like people can like understand how to have these conversations, but more so people can start to see themselves in what we teach.
Definitely, yeah. It's important to make sure that you can associate the experience of people and remember that, like, these aren't just people in history books. These are actual living human beings who lived or who are living, who are in these actual places. And so yes, I completely agree. That's why it's so crucial to teach history inclusively, because these aren't just people in history books. These are actual people who have gone through these experiences. And sometimes it's easy just looking at a page. It's easy to forget that sometimes. So we are going to be wrapping up shortly. If anyone has any questions they want to place in the Q&A, that'd be great. But in the meantime, while we let any further questions roll in, I'd like to talk about how, the different aspects of student activism and how student activism can take many different forms. I'll start off so for my club, Shout, it's incorporated directly into the school as a school club where students can come and sit together and talk about any grievances they may have and sit and ideate about how they can make actual change, going over reviewing legislation that already exists and sitting and talking about, all right, how can we create an actual tangible idea to turn into real change. Debbie, Isa, Tiara, Brandon, how have you guys seen student activism take many different facets?
Yeah, I think one of the ways I've seen it show up in just my campaign over the summer, I had members of high school Democrats knocking on doors with my campaign. And right now I have 2 interns on my campaign who are paid to help research policy, recruit testimony, and do fact sheets on some of the legislation that I have that will directly impact them and their peers. So I think there are so many different ways, whether it is activism, learning how to phone bank, learning how to write letters, reaching out to your legislator, or working on a campaign that can really build those skills and get you involved at any level of work and with any level of interest. Some people are not super into policy. Some people really want to knock on doors, and some people really want to know how to talk with people in their community. And those are all skills that working on a campaign can help with.
I also believe that this conversation is sitting here talking about student activism is a way that we can also engage in student activism, just like education, and having this conversation is one of the ways that you can start student activism. I think that this is the way that I most likely continue, just having the conversation about all this big and good topics with our students and our peers.
Definitely. Thank you both very much. And there's another question in the chat that I'd like to address by Akeem Lloyd. So what advice would you give youth who are not as comfortable as you all, but still want to be active?
Yeah, I think there's a role for everyone in being active, whether or not you're an extrovert or an introvert, or you like reading, or you like speaking, or you like graphic design. There is something for every single person, and just finding what what skills make sense to you and what issues you're passionate about, I think is the most important part. There's a place for artists, there's a place for readers, there's a place for writers, and there's a place for speakers, and there's a place for visionaries. So there is a place for every single person in the movement. And it just takes finding that place. Try everything, or try what interests you at least once. And if you find out that you're good at it, keep doing it. If you try something and you actually realize that you don't like it, then don't do it. And you might not hear this often, but if there's something that doesn't interest you, don't bother.
Yeah, I would like to jump off that too. I also feel like, especially when we're approaching advocacy, I think we look at the macro levels too, like really easily, because that's, you know, what's affecting us, like policy and our culture at large and society at large. But the micro work, like working within your community, your family, that's equally, if not sometimes more important. Sometimes advocacy is having conversations with your siblings or your mom or your dad or your guardians, anybody who is a part of your immediate community, and starting to shift these ideas that we tell, these stories that we tell about other people and what it means to be American. Those are essentially important. And especially now in the midst of COVID-19, the one benefit that has come through is, especially for me, being able to be in different rooms. I think taking advantage of the fact that you can, you know, show up and try out like one of these youth orgs from the comfort of your bedroom, right? Show up to meet and see if there's something that interests you, see if there's something that really speaks to you. If you want to organize, you don't have to always organize to do things in public. Sometimes it's emailing your friends, figuring out what ways you guys can get involved in your own school campus. I think it's important to not feel like you have to tackle these huge systemic issues, because there's work that needs to happen for those too, but there's also work that needs to happen in our communities. And if you don't feel that you're ready for that step, which you usually are, a lot of people who are making these decisions are not as educated as you think. If you're not ready for those big steps, like, feel empowered, feel the real strength that it is in shaping your own community. I think that's really where we need to start. And I think that's the best way to start.
Thank you all so much, Tiara, Ida, Brandon, Debbie, Dakota. I feel so inspired after these 3 panels. I really think that you all are going to change the world. And like, I don't know what the heck I was doing when I was in high school. I am going to drop here in the chat the survey that I mentioned earlier. Again, I promise it won't take you more than a minute, and it is very helpful for us if you go and fill that out real quick. I'm going to make this video available, as well as the last 2 panels, available through the PCL website. It's provcomlib.org. So keep your eye open for that. And one more big, huge thank you to all of our panelists and all of our team moderators. You all are incredible, and I'm so glad that we were able to do this. Thanks, everybody.